Hello and welcome to the Amateur Austenite. My name is Frances Duncan. I am an author and the founder of the Jane Austen Society of New Zealand. My co-host is my friend Sian.
Hello!
And today we are going to read to you chapter 37 of Mansfield Park by Jane Austen. I'll put in the notes the timestamp of when we get to the actual discussion if you want to skip the reading bit. We're not sure how it's going to work. Let us know what you think. Chapter 37. Mr Crawford gone, Sir Thomas's next object was that he should be missed, and he entertained great hope that his niece would find a blank in the loss of those attentions which at the time she had felt, or fancied, an evil. She had tasted of consequence in its most flattering form, and he did hope that the loss of it, the sinking again into nothing, would awaken very wholesome regrets in her mind. He watched her with this idea, but he could hardly tell with what success. He hardly knew whether there was any difference in her spirits or not. She was always so gentle and retiring that her emotions were beyond his discrimination. He did not understand her. He felt that he did not, and therefore applied to Edmund to tell him how she stood affected on the present occasion, and whether she were more or less happy than she had been. Edmund did not discern any symptom of regret, and thought his father a little unreasonable in supposing the first 3 or 4 days could produce any. What chiefly surprised Edmund was that Crawford's sister, the friend and companion who had been so much to her, should not be more visibly regretted. He wondered that Fanny spoke so seldom of her, and had so little voluntarily to say of her concern at this separation. Alas! It was this sister, this friend and companion, who was now the chief bane of Fanny's comfort. If she could have believed Mary's future fate as unconnected with Mansfield as she was determined the brothers should be, if she could have hoped to return thither, to be as distant as she was much inclined to think his, she would have been light of heart indeed. But the more she recollected and observed, the more deeply was she convinced that everything was now in a fairer train for Miss Crawford's marrying Edmund than it had ever been before. On his side, the inclination was stronger, on hers, less equivocal. His objections, the scruples of his integrity, seemed all done away. Nobody could tell how, and the doubts and hesitations of her ambition were equally got over, and equally without apparent reason. It could only be imputed to increasing attachment. His good and her bad feelings yielded to love, and such love must unite them. He was to go to town, as soon as some business relative to Thornton Lacey were completed. Perhaps within a fortnight. He talked of going. He loved to talk of it, and when once with her again, Fanny could not doubt the rest. Her acceptance must be as certain as his offer, and yet there were bad feelings still remaining which made the prospect of it most sorrowful to her, independently, she believed independently, of self. In their very last conversation, Miss Crawford, in spite of some amiable sensations and much personal kindness, had still been Miss Crawford. Still shown a mind led astray and bewildered, and without any suspicion of being so, darkened, yet fancying itself light. She might love, but she did not deserve Edmund by any other sentiment. Fanny believed there was scarcely a second feeling in common between them, and she may be forgiven by older sages for looking on the chance of Miss Crawford's future improvement as nearly desperate, for thinking that if Edmund's influence in this season of love had already done so little in clearing her judgment and regulating her notions, his worth would be finally wasted on her, even in years of matrimony. Experience might have hoped more for any young people so circumstanced, and impartiality would not have denied to Miss Crawford's nature that participation of the general nature of women which would lead her to adopt the opinions of the man she loved and respected as her own. But as such were Fanny's persuasions, she suffered very much from them, and could never speak of Miss Crawford without pain. Sir Thomas meanwhile went on with his own hopes and his own observations, still feeling a right, by all his knowledge of human nature, to expect to see the effect of the loss of power and consequence on his niece's spirits, and the past attentions of the lover producing a craving for their return. And he was soon afterwards able to account for his not yet completely and indubitably seeing all this by the prospect of another visitor, whose approach he could allow to be quite enough to support the spirits he was watching. William had obtained a 10 days leave of absence to be given to Northamptonshire, and was coming the happiest of lieutenants, because the latest made, to show his happiness and describe his uniform. He came, and he would have been delighted to show his uniform there too, had not cruel custom prohibited its appearance except on duty. So the uniform remained at Portsmouth, and Edmund conjectured that before Fanny had any chance of seeing it, all its own freshness and all the freshness of its wearer's feelings must be worn away. It would be sunk into a badge of disgrace, for what can be more unbecoming or more worthless than the uniform of a lieutenant who has been a lieutenant a year or two and sees others made commanders before him? So reasoned Edmund, till his father made him the confidant of a scheme which placed Fanny's chance of seeing the second lieutenant of HMS Thrush in all his glory in another light. This scheme was that she should accompany her brother back to Portsmouth and spend a little time with her own family. It had occurred to Sir Thomas in one of his dignified musings as a right and desirable measure, but before he absolutely made up his mind, he consulted his son. Edmund considered it every way and saw nothing but what was right. The thing was good in itself and could not be done at a better time, and he had no doubt of it being highly agreeable to Fanny. This was enough to determine Sir Thomas, and a decisive, "Then so it shall be," closed that stage of the business. Sir Thomas retiring from it with some feelings of satisfaction and views of good over and above what he had communicated to his son, for his prime motive in sending her away had very little to do with the propriety of her seeing her parents again, and nothing at all with any idea of making her happy. He certainly wished her to go willingly, but he has certainly wished her to be heartily sick of home before her visit ended, and that a little abstinence from the elegancies and luxuries of Mansfield Park would bring her mind into a sober state and incline her to a just estimate of the value of that home of greater permanence and equal comfort of which she had the offer. It was a medicinal project upon his niece's understanding, which he must consider as at present diseased. The residence of 8 or 9 years in the abode of wealth and plenty had a little disordered her powers of comparing and judging. Her father's house would, in all probability, teach her the value of a good income, and he trusted that she would be the wiser and happier woman all her life for the experiment he had devised. Had Fanny been at all addicted to raptures, she must have had a strong attack of them when she first understood what was intended. When her uncle first made her the offer of visiting the parents and brothers and sisters from whom she had been divided almost half her life, of returning for a couple of months to the scenes of her infancy, with William for the protector and companion of her journey, and the certainty of continuing to see William to the last hour of his remaining on land. Had she ever given way to bursts of delight, it must have been then, for she was delighted, but her happiness was of a quiet, deep, heart-swelling sort, and though never a great talker, she was always more inclined to silence when feeling most strongly. At the moment, she could only thank and accept. Afterwards, when familiarized with the visions of enjoyment so suddenly opened, she could speak more largely to William and Edmund of what she felt, but still there were emotions of tenderness that could not be clothed in words. The remembrance of all her earliest pleasures, and of what she had suffered in being torn from them, came over her with renewed strength, and it seemed as if to be at home again would heal every pain that had since grown out of the separation. To be in the centre of such a circle, loved by so many, and more loved by all than she had ever been before, to feel affection without fear or restraint, to feel herself the equal of those who surrounded her, to be at peace from all mention of the Crawfords, safe from every look which could be fancied a reproach on their account. This was a prospect to be dwelt on with a fondness that could be but half acknowledged. Edmund, too, to be 2 months from him, and perhaps she might be allowed to make her absence 3, must do her good. At a distance, unassailed by his looks or his kindness, and safe from the perpetual irritation of knowing his heart, and striving to avoid his confidence, she should be able to reason herself into a proper estate. She should be able to think of him as in London, and arranging everything there without wretchedness. What might have been hard to bear at Mansfield was to become a slight evil at Portsmouth. The only drawback was the doubt of her Aunt Bertram's being comfortable without her. She was of use to no one else. But there she might be missed to a degree that she did not like to think of. And that part of the arrangement was, indeed, the hardest for Sir Thomas to accomplish, and what only he could have accomplished at all. But he was master at Mansfield Park. When he had really resolved on any measure, he could always carry it through, and now by dint of long talking on the subject, explaining and dwelling on the duty of Fanny sometimes seeing her family, he did induce his wife to let her go. Obtaining it rather from submission, however, than conviction, for Lady Bertram was convinced of very little more than that Sir Thomas thought Fanny ought to go, and therefore that she must. In the calmness of her own dressing-room, in the impartial flow of her own meditations, unbiased by his bewildering statements, she could not acknowledge any necessity for Fanny's ever going near a father and mother who had done without her so long, while she was so useful to herself. And as to the not missing her, which under Mrs. Norris's discussion was the point attempted to be proved, she set herself very steadily against admitting any such thing. Sir Thomas had appealed to her reason, conscience, and dignity. He called it a sacrifice, and demanded it of her goodness and self-command as such. But Mrs. Norris wanted to persuade her that Fanny could be very well spared, she being ready to give up all her own time to her as requested, and in short, could not really be wanted or missed. "That may be, sister," was all Lady Bertram's reply. "I dare say you are very right, but I am sure I shall miss her very much." The next step was to communicate with Portsmouth. Fanny wrote to offer herself, and her mother's answer, though short, was so kind, a few simple lines expressed so natural and motherly a joy in the prospect of seeing her child again, as to confirm all the daughter's views of happiness in being with her, convincing her that she should now find a warm and affectionate friend in the mamma, who had certainly shown no remarkable fondness for her formerly, but this she could easily suppose to have been her own fault, or her own fancy. She had probably alienated love by the helplessness and fretfulness of a fearful temper, or being unreasonable and wanting a larger share than any one among so many could deserve. Now, when she knew better how to be useful and how to forbear, and when her mother could be no longer occupied by the incessant demands of a house full of little children, there would be leisure and inclination for every comfort, and they should soon be what mother and daughter ought to be to each other. William was almost as happy in the plan as his sister. It would be the greatest pleasure to him to have her there to the last moment before he sailed, and perhaps find her there still when he came in from his first cruise. And besides, he wanted her so very much to see the Thrush before she went out of harbour. The Thrush was certainly the finest sloop in the service, and there were several improvements in the dockyard too, which he quite longed to show her. He did not scruple to add that her being at home for a while would be a great advantage to everybody. "I do not know how it is," said he, "but we seem to want some of your nice ways and orderliness at my father's. The house is always in confusion. You will set things going in a better way, I am sure. You will tell my mother how it all ought to be, and you will be so useful to Susan, and you will teach Betsy and make the boys love and mind you. How right and comfortable it will all be." By the time Mrs. Price's answer arrived, there remained but a very few days more to be spent at Mansfield. And for part of one of those days the young travellers were in a good deal of alarm on the subject of their journey, for when the mode of it came to be talked of, and Mrs. Norris found that all her anxiety to save her brother-in-law's money was vain, and that in spite of her wishes and hints for a less expensive conveyance of Fanny, they were to travel post. When she saw Sir Thomas actually give William notes for the purpose, she was struck with the idea of there being room for a third in the carriage, and suddenly seized with a strong inclination to go with them, to go and see her poor dear sister Price. She proclaimed her thoughts. She must say that she had more than half a mind to go with the young people. It would be such an indulgence to her. She had not seen her poor dear sister Price for more than 20 years, and it would be a help to the young people in their journey to have her older head to manage for them. And she could not help thinking her poor dear sister Price would feel it very unkind of her not to come by such an opportunity. William and Fanny were horror-struck at the idea. All the comfort of their comfortable journey would be destroyed at once, With woeful countenances, they looked at each other. Their suspense lasted an hour or two. No one interfered to encourage or dissuade. Mrs. Norris was left to settle the matter by herself, and it ended to the infinite joy of her nephew and niece, in the recollection that she could not possibly be spared from Mansfield Park at present, that she was a great deal too necessary to Sir Thomas and Lady Bertram for her to be able to answer it to herself to leave them even for a week, and therefore must certainly sacrifice every other pleasure to that of being useful to them. It had, in fact, occurred to her that though taken to Portsmouth for nothing, it would be hardly possible for her to avoid paying her own expenses back again. So her dear sister Price was left to all the disappointment of her missing such an opportunity, and another 20 years' absence, perhaps, begun. Edmund's plans were affected by this Portsmouth journey, this absence of Fanny's. He, too, had a sacrifice to make to Mansfield Park, as well as his aunt. He had intended, about this time, to be going to London, but he could not leave his father and mother just when everybody else of most importance to their comfort was leaving them, and with an effort, felt but not boasted of, he delayed for a week or two longer a journey which he was looking forward to with the hope of its fixing his happiness forever. He told Fanny of it. She knew so much already that she must know everything. It made the substance of one other confidential discourse about Miss Crawford, and Fanny was the more affected from feeling it to be the last time in which Miss Crawford's name would ever be mentioned between them with any remains of liberty. Once afterwards she was alluded to by him. Lady Bertram had been telling her niece in the evening to write to her soon and often, and promising to be a good correspondent herself, and Edmund, at a convenient moment, then added in a whisper, "And I shall write to you, Fanny, when I have anything worth writing about, anything to say that I think you will like to hear, and that you will not hear so soon from any other quarter." Had she doubted his meaning while she listened, the glow in his face, when she looked up at him, would have been decisive. For this letter she must try to arm herself, that a letter from Edmund should be a subject of terror. She began to feel that she had not yet gone through all the changes of opinion and sentiment which the progress of time and variation of circumstances occasion in this world of changes. The vicissitudes of the human mind had not yet been exhausted by her. Poor Fanny! Though going as she did, willingly and eagerly, the last evening at Mansfield Park must still be wretchedness. Her heart was completely sad at parting. She had tears for every room in the house, much more for every beloved inhabitant. She clung to her aunt, because she would miss her. She kissed the hand of her uncle with struggling sobs, because she had displeased him. And as for Edmund, she could neither speak, nor look, nor think, when the last moment came with him, and it was not till it was all over that she knew he was giving her the affectionate farewell of a brother. All this passed overnight, for the journey was to begin very early in the morning, and when the small, diminished party met at breakfast, William and Fanny were talked of as already advanced one stage. So I have just read chapter 37, but in case you didn't listen, in chapter 37, William comes back to visit again. Sir Thomas decides it would be great if Fanny goes home with him so that Fanny can realise how awful her parents' home is and agree to marry Mr Crawford.
But that's not the only thing. It's often portrayed in the film as just that.
Oh yeah, he does have twofold motives.
And it is also that opportunity for Fanny to see William in his uniform, because he's not allowed to wear his uniform except on duty.
Which is always portrayed incorrectly in the films, because he always turns up in uniform.
Exactly. You're not allowed to wear your uniform if you're not on duty.
They do it in Persuasion too.
He's a bit different because there are different rules for different ranks. They should not be in uniform all the time. They're not on duty.
Like those American films that have the cheerleaders wearing their uniforms to school all the time.
No.
Nobody does that.
So there's actually a lot of reasons for this. One, it's this opportunity for her to spend some more time with William before he sails, see the ship and see the uniform and have that whole opportunity to spend a little bit more time. So Thomas is already talking about her coming back. So there's no implication that he's banishing her. Whereas again, that's something in the film is often almost like an underlying, you will stay there until you come to your senses. But he's always just thinking of it as a short-term thing, that she will come back. The other thing is recognising how Lady Bertram actually really rises to this occasion and has to be persuaded to let her go because she acknowledges her value and her youth.
I think she makes a really good point when she says Fanny's not been near her parents for years. Why do they need to see her now? They've not bothered. They've not said, can we see our daughter?
I don't know how much they've written to her. Maybe they have. So she does make some very valid points. And it's only interfering Mrs. Norris who's glad to see the back of them and then tries to really ruin their trip by the suggestion that she should come with them as well for a free post-chase ride.
And they were horror-struck.
I mean, I can just visualise them looking at each other like, oh dear.
But luckily she's dissuaded without anyone having to say anything.
Once she realises it's going to cost her money to come back.
She likes spending other people's money.
Yes, she's probably quite a little miser. Well, she is quite a little miser, and I bet she's got quite a little packet stacked away somewhere.
No doubt. So Sir Thomas wants to make sure that Fanny is missing Mr. Crawford, and part of the motivation for sending her to Portsmouth is to make sure that she does, because she doesn't seem to be missing him at Mansfield. He almost doesn't believe her though, because the text says about Mr. Crawford's attentions that she fancied them in evil, and I think that is Sir Thomas's voice there.
Yes. It's hard for him to comprehend. Again, because he has none of the backstory.
He doesn't really know Mr. Crawford.
He doesn't know. He only knows what Mr. Crawford presented since he's returned. And he's been a charming young man who's shown obvious affection for his niece. He hasn't had any obnoxious behaviours. He's well set up. He's got a sister, so there'd be companionship, who seems to be getting on with Edmund. So from Sir Thomas's perspective, this is all perfectly reasonable. And if all the history hadn't happened, anybody would find it hard to understand. It's only us.
Because we know
Because
more.
we know more.
It proves that he doesn't know Fanny very well as well, because he can't tell how she's feeling. She was always so gentle and retiring that her emotions were beyond his discrimination. He did
Very
not
good at hiding.
understand her. But he goes to Edmund because he knows that Edmund knows her well.
And she's so very good at hiding her emotions. She's got a very good mask. And that's a defensive mechanism, of course.
From her abusive childhood, yes.
Mm.
She's uncomfortable being close to Edmund at the moment because of Miss Crawford. And Fanny is certain of Miss Crawford's acceptance must be as certain as his offer. Something's happened. The text can't tell us what, but something has removed the obstacles between Miss Crawford and Edmund. It seems inevitable now. But Fanny still wants Miss Crawford to change. She might love, but she did not deserve Edmund by any other sentiment.
Because, again, she's still seeing Miss Crawford as Miss Crawford. So Miss Crawford hasn't acknowledged any of her own faults. She hasn't really acknowledged that she doesn't respect the clergy, and yet she's going to marry a clergyman. So she wants to change this clergyman into presumably a bishop. So she's going to be very ambitious for this particular clergyman, which is still the same person that she is, and not seeing some of the evils of her brother's behaviour. Still not acknowledge the inappropriateness of giving the necklace. Fanny is the only one that sees any of them in their full light.
I think there is a little bit of resentment in her view of Miss Crawford, though.
And I think she's quite honest about that. She'd like to think that it isn't, but the fact that she is liking to think that there isn't really means that she knows that there is a little bit. But having said that, she's not going out of her way to alienate Edmund from her. You know, she's not really said anything negative about Miss Crawford.
There's a whole bit about how people's nature change when they get married, and she would adopt the opinions of the man she respected and loved as her own. Such were Fanny's persuasions, which is hilarious.
I love that bit.
But she could never speak of Miss Crawford without pain. She doesn't believe that marrying Edmund will actually have any assistance to Miss Crawford's character, which means that they will continue to war their entire relationship.
Because they're not going to be what the other one wants. So they're trying to remake the other in their image, which is what many people do when they get married. So there often ends up being some fundamental differences that you end up having to live with, or you have to walk away. If you live with them, it can be very demoralising because you can't then have an effective conversation. When you get married, what you want is the ability to have companionship, to be able to talk through ideas, which is what Fanny and Edmund do all the time. They're always debating, talking about things, educating, changing their views. That doesn't seem to be what Miss Crawford's able to do, except from a political perspective. So she can do it to be a political hostess, know how to say the right things to the right people.
The text very clearly says that Sir Thomas's motivations had nothing at all with any idea of making her happy, even though Fanny's really happy at the prospect of going home. Yeah. And she does refer to it as home. To be in the centre of a circle, more loved by all than she'd ever been before, to feel affection without fear or restraint, to feel herself the equal of those who surrounded her. Problem being that none of that's going to happen, and I really felt for her reading that. She's so excited.
Yes.
It's all going to fall over. But Sir Thomas wished her to be heartily sick of home before her visit ended, and that a little abstinence from the elegancies and luxuries of Mansfield Park would incline her to a juster estimate of the value of that home of greater permanence, i.e. marrying Mr Crawford and living with him, and equal comfort, which I also wonder because surely Mansfield Park is worth more than Everingham.
It's more of a question of size than comfort. It might only have 20 guest rooms as opposed to 25.
That's true.
But it doesn't mean to say it's any less comfortable or pleasant. It'll still have nice grounds.
So slightly smaller house, slightly smaller grounds, but still the same level of comfort. Yeah, good point. Probably be more comfortable for Fanny, actually. She wouldn't feel lost in it.
That is one way where Sir Thomas is actually absolutely on point, because the thing that gets Fanny in the end, without spoiling the story, of course, is the noise in Portsmouth. There's no quiet for her to go.
I wonder, and actually from something you said earlier, whether we might now consider Fanny to be on the autism spectrum. Probably quite low on the spectrum, but the not being able to cope with lots of things at once, noise, the sort of internalising things, and the masking. It was the masking that made me consider it. Because that's a term that's often used, particularly for females who have autism, because they're often not diagnosed because females are very good at masking.
Yeah. I think the speculation there is interesting, but I think there's also so many other factors for Fanny around her upbringing. So it's a question of nature versus nurture in her. And I think nurture had a lot to do with her behaviours.
Lady Bertram will not be convinced. She is only convinced of very little more than that Sir Thomas thought Fanny ought to go, and therefore that she must. She submitted to her husband's will, but still doesn't agree with him. Even though Mrs Norris wants to persuade her that Fanny could be very well spared.
And this is a lovely piece because it is actually Lady Bertram saying, well, I will miss her.
I am sure I shall miss her very much.
Yes. All right, so it could be, a selfish missing of, but it is acknowledging that she's grown very fond of having Fanny around to read, to be in the room with. Fanny's a wonderful, comforting, calm presence for somebody like Lady Bertram, which is what Lady Bertram likes.
I wonder if they're similar in the fact that neither of them like change. We know Fanny doesn't really like change. Perhaps Lady Bertram also doesn't really like change.
Doesn't seem to like lots of crowds or visitors.
It's interesting that right after Lady Bertram's declarations, we go into an examination of Fanny's relationship with her mother. Because here is her pseudo-mother, who she has a very good relationship with. But Fanny's hoping that she will have a good relationship with her mother now. This is quite painful. She knew she didn't have one formally, but she thought it was her own fault.
She's very inclined to take blame for anything that doesn't seem to be working right.
she thought that it might be to do with her own temper, or it could be the unreasonableness of wanting a larger share than anyone among so many could deserve. My mother has too many children. I don't deserve to get any of her attention. And coming from a big family, it is hard to get individual attention from your parents because there are so many children. I'm very lucky that as an adult I've got to spend individual time with my parents and build relationships with them that I never had when I was a child.
It's quite different when you're an adult, isn't it? And some people don't always get. My sister never really had that opportunity. She was very late in making her peace with mum and dad.
It's hard, eh? I read a thing yesterday that said if your adult children don't want anything to do with you, that is your fault. They are now adults. It is their choice.
Well, there's a little bit of rose-coloured spectacles as far as Fanny's concerned in this. I think she's had communication with Susan.
We know she has with William, but I don't know if she had connection.
So maybe
with
she's actually heard about Susan from William. She's heard about what the family are up to.
Edmund at this point was supposed to be going to London to engage himself to Miss Crawford, but he delays it, and he does not boast of it, as opposed to Mrs Norris, who is boasting of the fact that she's sacrificing going to see her dear sister Price to be of use.
I bet Sir Thomas thinking, I wish she'd leave.
Edmund says to Fanny that he will write to her when he has something of importance to write, basically when he becomes engaged to Miss Crawford, which is quite painful for her. That a letter from Edmund should be a subject of terror. She uses the words terror and horror, opposite sides of the same page. There is a lot of emotional stuff going on for Fanny in this chapter.
I think for Fanny the challenge is it's not just that she's in love with Edmund, but she's truly of the belief that Mary is not worthy of him. And in this she's not wrong. There's no other females on the scene that we could compare with, or that Fanny could compare with Mary and say, oh, she would have been a better, except maybe those vicar's daughters that she's not met. She wouldn't be happy, but she would understand it and respect the choice. They
were raised right, they probably behave correctly.
And they know what's expected of a clergyman's wife, all these sorts of things. She'd be unhappy, but she could accept it. She hasn't seen any change in Mary in terms of her thoughts and morals, despite the fact that she's fallen in love with Edmund. So no, you can't say anything. I mean, you never can. Even when somebody's partner's not worthy of them, it's not something that you can ever say. And she knows she can't say it because she knows she's in love with him.
So she knows she has other motives. The chapter ends, Fanny and William are already on their way to Portsmouth. So he comes to visit and they leave all within one chapter.
Must have been a few days though. Well, it was a few days.
They've got to get the response from Portsmouth and then organise things, and it's a couple of days to organise. Maybe not. Maybe Sir Thomas came to the idea quickly, like with the ball. He had the thought one night and by the next morning.
He's decisive. He's run an estate. He can make decisions and make things happen.
And that is our summary of Chapter 37 of Mansfield Park by Jane Austen. My name is Frances Duncan. You can find me at francesduncanwrites.com and on Twitter at Frances_Duncan. Thank you for listening, and we wish you happy reading.